have you seen that video going around recently of that Gen Z girl finding out what the real world is like, or finding out what real jobs are like? I'll play a little clip of it for you now, just so you're sort of caught up on the context here, because people are dunking on this girl. I know your attention span's limited at best these days, so I'm going to play some zombies alongside. Just have a listen.
I know I'm probably just being so dramatic and annoying, but this is my first job, like my first 9-to-5 job after college, and I'm in person, and I'm commuting in the city, and it takes me forever to get there. There's no way I'm going to be able to afford living in the city right now, so that's off the table. Like, duh! If I was able to walk to work, and it'd be fine, but I'm not. So it literally takes me, like, I leave here, like, I get on the train at 7:30, and I don't get home till, like, 6:15 earliest, and then, like, I don't have time to do anything. I want to shower, eat my dinner, and go to sleep. I don't have time or energy to cook my dinner either. Like, I don't have energy to work out. Like, that's out the window. Like, I'm so upset. Oh my God. Nothing to do with my job at all, but just like the 9-to-5 schedule in general is crazy. Being in the office 9 to 5, like if it was remote, you get off at 5 and you're home and everything's fine. But like, I'm not home. It takes me long to get home, and like people that drive to the office, like you don't get off at 5.
So this is this girl's first 9-to-5 job after college. She gets on her train at 7:30 a.m. every morning and gets home at 6:15. So that's 10 hours and 45 minutes of a given day of her life spent at work or on work. Obviously, some of it is the commute, some of it is the job itself. And she says that like she obviously needs to shower and she needs to eat, and then she doesn't have any energy to do anything else. And so she kind of goes to bed and wakes up the next day to do the exact same thing. And she doesn't feel like she has time for friends or for dating or to just be a human being. And an important thing that she does in the videos, like she recognizes she could have it worse, right? She says that it absolutely could be worse. She could be working more. It could be harder. And also, she lives in the US, and the US is generally a country with a pretty decent standard of living, and etc. Like, she's not saying that she has the worst life on the planet, right? But people are dunking on this girl in such an aggressive way, being like, "Oh, princess, oh, a sweetheart, I'm so sorry that you found out that the real world actually requires you to apply yourself." Like, it's that sort of level of condescension that I'm seeing in the responses to this girl. Or it's people being like, "Oh, well, I mean, like, I had it hard. Like, maybe I'm like 40 years old now. I had it hard when I was her age. I struggled with these things too. And so she should just get used to it. She just needs to pull herself up by her bootstraps," or whatever the frick that expression is, and she needs to just suck it up and learn to deal with it, right? Learn to deal with that difficulty in her life. Or it's people saying, "Well, like, my life's even harder than hers because, like, I have maybe like a health condition that I have to navigate on top of all of that stuff. And so, like, if I can do it, she should too." Or it's people saying, "Well, like millennials complained about the exact same thing and they didn't have it as hard as their grandparents. Like, their grandparents definitely had it harder, but millennials were making all these complaints, and would you look at that? They figured out a way to survive. If it's possible for them, it's absolutely possible for you when we live in the most technologically advanced age that has ever happened in human history, obviously, to date. Like, there is so much cushiness in our lives now. We have so much sort of support from the world of medicine and the world of technology as well that makes our lives so much easier. How dare you complain in the face of all of that stuff? Like, with all of that stuff in your back pocket available to you in your pocket at any time on your phone. Like, how dare you? So I've seen these complaints, and I figured it would be an interesting thing to have a little conversation about, because I think that what she's getting at is something that I've really felt about the world of work for a while now. I want to kind of dig into, but in order to dig into it, I am going to need some ammo. So give me 30 seconds here to figure out. Maybe I'll go hit the box and just pap the first weapon that I get. Should we do that? So on the way there, let's talk about the history of work just a little bit. And I'm going to be completely transparent. I'm not plagiarizing, but certainly massively inspired by Kyla Scanlon's reporting of this particular story. I've followed Kyla for a couple of years now, since she originally started her TikTok. I think that her stuff is great. That's inspired me to sort of talk about this stuff in this video. So the 9-to-5 work week itself that this girl is complaining about and struggling with, right? Like, where did that even come from in the first place? Well, historically, pre-industrial revolution. Oh, I can double pap. I forgot. Okay, hold on. Give me a second here. Give me a second here. Give me my regurgitator. Gimme. What am I doing for time? I'm okay. I don't want double thunderwall. Come on, hurry. Okay, blast furnace. Cool, that's fine. Blast furnace and thunderwall. Yes, that'll do. So before the Industrial Revolution, like, let's just go like further back in time, right? Like a couple hundred years. The structure of people's day was pretty aligned to the raising and setting of the sun. And that, I think, makes sense for obvious reason. Obviously, when you are living in an agriculture-based society, the rising and the setting of the sun is where things get done. I mean, before electricity, are you going to stay up all night reading a friggin' book when you can't see anything? No. Is your eyesight going to survive if you try and do that by candlelight? No. So that was sort of how that kind of worked. And it was a much more loose kind of process. Like, we didn't have these big machines. We didn't have this massive just industry in general. And so things were a little bit more kind of loose and fluid, I think, in that regard. And then the Industrial Revolution happened, and throughout the 1800s, there was this massive evolution of the labor movement and a real pushing of the general population of people to say, okay, like, well, we've got all this industry that is growing around us now, and the world of work needs to adapt to those changes. This is a completely new thing. It's something we've never experienced before. And there was a lot of protest and striking in the 1800s about this very thing. And then in 1914, the Ford Motor Company basically did something pretty drastic and pretty unexpected, I think, for many. They doubled wages of workers, and they limited wages of workers from being like crazy hours, like 16-hour days. They limited those to 8-hour days. And obviously, you got a bunch of investors and shareholders and people with a lot of money and not a lot of elbow grease going on here that at the time were saying, like, well, you're doubling wages. That could just be money for me. Like, that could be my profit. Why are you doing this? Especially when the wider industry is not following suit, or the wider industry has not kind of led by their own example here. Like, why are we leading by example? But it worked out. The Ford Motor Company's profits doubled in a couple of years after they made the change, and it was a very successful move for them. And so obviously from there, you have other companies that were sort of looking at that going, wait a sec, like, why was that successful? And maybe is there something that we can learn from that and do ourselves? And if you fast forward just sort of 20 years or so, just before the Second World War, it actually became law that the work week was then limited to 40 hours. So you no longer had these crazy schedules of 16-hour days or what have you. And there were a bunch of other kind of like worker assurances and protections put in place. Like, for example, children were taken off assembly lines. Like, that was no longer something that was okay. Prior to that, it was, which is insane to think about. Like, you imagine young children today working in factories, operating heavy machinery or being around heavy machinery. It sounds like insanity, right? But these are conditions that historically people lived in and treated as completely normal. Like, that was not a weird thing. That was just how society was, and that's how people's grandparents did it. So this change came about in, I think it was 1938, and those assurances were made for workers, and rights improved. And that was off the back of like 100 years of protest and striking and thought being put into this area, and recognition of the fact that the world of work had changed, and it was no longer acceptable to treat human beings the way that they were being treated 100 years prior, because the expectations of them in the way that they spent their time had changed, right? It had developed, and change was okay. Like, it didn't always have to be the exact same way it had always been previously. Now, if we look at the way that things are today, obviously in 2023, 2024, etc., the world of work is so different to where it was in, let's say, 1940, right? Like, all of us agree with that. No matter what you're doing, whether you're a student right now, whether you're a parent that is working from home and raising your kids, whether you're working your traditional 9 to 5 and you're single, like, whatever position you have in society, whether you run a company or not, I think we can all agree the world of work itself is very, very different. And the diversity of roles in work are also very different. Like, the idea of working remote on a laptop, obviously in 1940, was non-existent. Like, that was not even conceivable. The idea of moving to Thailand or Bali and maintaining your like software programming job while living in this verdant, like jungly terrain would have sounded like complete fiction in the Second World War. But it is a real thing now. And obviously that's not how the majority of people live, but like these are options. There is new optionality in the world of work that previously was simply not possible. And yet, through all of that, the 9 to 5 remains the same. The 9 to 5 from 1938 is still the 9 to 5 in 2023. And so just as an initial kind of sweeping back or swiping back at the comments on that girl's post saying, well, like, that's just the way things are, honey. The way things are, if that argument had been used historically over time and always followed, was children working in assembly lines. Like, are you fighting for that just because that's how things are? Probably not, right? So we have to recognize that sometimes change can be a good thing. Like, sometimes progress in society comes from change, and that's not something to necessarily demonize. Just as an initial comment here before I continue. Now, in the case of young people and Zoomers and those wonderful folks that are inheriting the earth from us all, like year by year, generation by generation, you also have a class of people, a group of people that have lived through the pandemic, and for many of them, that pandemic has been in their kind of introduction to the world of work. Like, these people haven't worked their sort of traditional 9 to 5s in the office prior to the pandemic. They've started getting into work during it and are now returning to the workplace and returning to the office. And so naturally with that comes an extra level of difficulty and of recognition that, okay, during the pandemic, like, I saw another world. I saw things very differently. I saw a situation where it was possible for me to jump on my PC, maybe not at exactly 9 a.m., like, maybe I actually jump on my PC at 9:30 because I don't have any work at 9 and I know that no one else is on at 9. So, like, I'm a little flexy with my hours and nobody really knows it, right? I can spend a little bit of extra time in the shower in the morning. Or maybe it means that you finish at 5 and you don't have a commute home, right? And so you have a little bit more time to actually do your hobbies. The commute hasn't drained you. Just the mental fatigue alone of the commute, right? That hasn't trained you to the point that you're like, well, I don't want to go to the park or go to the gym or do a workout or work out from home or whatever it might be. Like, I don't want to do those things because I'm so exhausted. That was less of a barrier to the way that people were constructing their lives, obviously, during the pandemic. There were other limitations, don't get me wrong. You couldn't just go and see your mates and hang out in a bar. But maybe you had a little bit more mental space available to you to consider certain things in your life, hobbies, learning an instrument, doing more reading, learning a new skill, a new craft, trying out new side hustles, like new other aspects of work that you might be interested in. Like, there was room for that, right? And so we've got this massive group of people that had only ever experienced that as life and sort of saw the good in that, and then had to turn around in 2022 and be like, hold on, I now need to give up all of the freedom that I have here in favor of a model that people say is better, but only affects me negatively. It only has a net negative impact on me. It only means I'm less happy. It only means I have less time for myself. It only means I have less time for my family and my hobbies and what makes me tick and me operate well as a human being. It often means that their work suffers as well, because obviously less fully realized people, less sort of self-actualized people are going to be less productive. Like, they're just going to be depressed. They're going to be miserable. And so that was a big thing as well. And then these people would see these billionaires coming out and saying, well, it turns out that working from home, working remote means you're less productive. And they'd be like, by what standard? Who's doing the measurement here? What exactly do you mean by less productive in this way? We're certainly seeing a lot of video games, to use a poor anecdotal example this year, but we're seeing a lot of video games in 2023 that have benefited from remote work and benefited to insanely positive degrees. I mean, this has been one of the best years for video game development, I think, that we've had in a very, very long time. And a massive contributor to that is the fact that devs have been able to claim back a little bit of time in their lives, working from home, working remotely, and therefore being just a little bit more content and actualized human beings. And I know it's anecdotal and it's a weak point, but it's a point nonetheless. To sort of blanket say that, yeah, I mean, remote work is just inherently bad is maybe to be a little uninventive, perhaps. I think that there's surely room for you to say, well, actually, I think working from home could be more productive. Like, there is room for it to improve, but that doesn't mean that it's just inherently something to demonize and inherently something to say, well, we're not doing this because we haven't figured it out perfectly yet. Like, I don't think that's a strong argument. I think that that's a sort of unwillingness to experiment and to tinker, to try and find a better system when a better system does feel like maybe it is actually due and maybe it is necessary in the current world that we live in. On that note as well, I think that historically there's been a real push, a very sort of like men in suits capitalist push for people to find their true identity through their work. Like their identity is based on their career, and like your way of finding fulfillment in life is to progress in your career specifically, right? Rather than through whatever else happens in your life. Like maybe it's starting a family, but again, it's really anchored on building up that career so you can start a family, etc. Like that's so much of the kind of dogma that I think a lot of people are raised on, is like, yeah, your career is where you find fulfillment in your life, and that's what you need to chase. But I think that increasingly these days, and again, even more so after the pandemic, I think the pandemic was a sort of watershed moment in this regard. That's a nuke. Yeah, let's go for the nuke. Whee! Yummy. I think people have increasingly been realizing that, you know what, work isn't what fulfills me. Work isn't what really kind of makes me tick. And it's not something that in my sort of day-to-day life right now I go to, do my work, and then get back from and feel energized. In fact, for many, I think it does the opposite. It's a drain, and it would be completely foolish to say that service workers, whether you're working in retail or like you're a delivery driver or like, who knows, right? Like of the million workers out there that are in all of those positions, I think that it's very unlikely that you look at a Deliveroo driver and you're like, yeah, I think that you probably feel really whole when you're delivering those meals. Like that's pretty unlikely, right? I think that there's potential always to find gratification and to prioritize gratitude as a means of seeking joy in mundane tasks. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that if you work in a supermarket, you can't feel fulfilled by any means. And in fact, I saw a show about this very recently at the Donmar warehouse here in London, called Clyde's, which was, I think, the most produced show in America in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And Clyde's focuses on a diner that is like essentially like a truck stop diner for truckers on their sort of daily commutes. And it's the story of this one woman who runs the place. She's Clyde. And then you've got a couple of workers at that restaurant who are actually ex-convicts. And she's taken them in because she knows that they can't work anywhere else. And so she's sort of doing them a favor, but she's also horrible, but they have to stay there because they're trapped in the system. And it's like, it's an opportunity and nowhere else will take them. So you kind of get the idea. But the show really digs into this whole concept of finding gratitude for being alive and finding fulfillment in the smallest of things, like just the preparing of a sandwich. Like, how do you express your humanity through the preparing of a grilled cheese? How do you do that? And does that truly make the grilled cheese better? Like, does that completely transform the grilled cheese, perhaps? Does this sort of come across in the food? And does it even need to? Like, if you are there and you're preparing this food and you're putting your whole sandwich juicy into it, like, are you therefore gonna be happy, even if it turns out at the end of the day that the sort of reality is that that's the exact same sandwich you would have made if you didn't give a damn? I bring this up to say that I think there's room, don't get me wrong, I think there's room to find real joy in the mundane and in these tasks that you might not have grown up wanting to make sandwiches, but you can still find joy in doing so later in life. Like, I recognize that, but at the same time, I think that for many people, especially if you're in one of those sorts of jobs, the likelihood that you feel whole as a human is pretty damn low. And you probably are looking for aspects of your personal life to fill those sorts of gaps. You're looking for those hobbies. You're looking for that time that you spend in the gym, that time you spend with your friends, with your family, etc. And it feels like even though we have made so many advances in technology and things along those lines, there is also still this real marriage that society has to this 9-to-5 format that for many people just eats into their life in a negative way. Like commuting, for instance, right? Like, we live in a world where we've got more public transport than ever, and we obviously have technology, meaning that we can navigate super easily compared to what we used to be able to do, and etc., etc. And still, this poor girl is having to commute pretty much 90 minutes each way just to get to work and start her day. And that's a hell of a long time. Like, with 3 hours back in a given day, you think that she might have a little bit more energy to do some of the things that right now she wishes she could, like to date or to hang out with her friends or to go to the gym or what have you. I think that's probably pretty likely. And I think that also we live in a world where religion has declined greatly in society over the last like couple hundred years. And continues to do so. And it seems to be a trend that is going to sort of be preserved and maintain itself over time in the future. And on top of that, I think that there is so much focus these days on individualism and so much focus on the fact that as much as the internet brings us together, the internet also really eats into our lives in a way that separates us. Like everyone is constantly trying to find their tribe and label themselves with a myriad of different labels, whether it's your sort of like personality type, like, you know, the whole like, what is it? Myers-Briggs, I think it's called, like whether it's that or whether it's just about your sort of allegiance to a given fandom. Like you might label yourself as like a Swiftie if you're a Taylor Swift fan, or, you know, like there's like 1,000,001 versions of those sorts of things. I mean, people have it even with content creators. Like different content creators will refer to their audience as, I don't know, I was going to say minions for a minute there. I mean, historically, I've experimented with melons. Like I thought that was funny at one point. It's not something I really say anymore, but I just thought it was a funny thing. And then people would like self-identify and be like, yep, I'm a melon. See, you see why I think it's funny? But I mean, like you have so much focus on that individuality and feeling like you need to attach yourself to a group in order to belong. But these groups are so often groups that don't really physically exist in person. They don't exist in a space. They don't exist in a what was it called? A third space, something like that. Like it's not like you have home and then work and then this third place where you go to be a zombies fan. That third space is just the internet, just as it is for everything else. And so you've got this real reliance on the internet in that regard, but it also means that we're very separated from one another and we don't see each other in person as much as we maybe could, because that whole world is there and that space doesn't exist in the physical world. And so you have this decline in community in person. And what do you think that leads to? That leads to people feeling like, well, I'm kind of really married even more now to work than ever before, because work is where I get my social interaction and work is where I get my sort of third space. But also, hold on, no, I don't. I have to work while I'm there, right? So you've kind of got people being like, well, I need to fill this gap and work is kind of doing it for me. So I'm kind of putting work on this pedestal to save me and to give me my humanity. But then at the same time, it's designed entirely to avoid that and to sort of prevent that from happening. And so I look at all of these comments, right? I look at all of the replies to this girl's tweet. Yes, yummy. And I see a society that more than ever is happiest when dunking on other people. I see a society where we really have gotten to a point where people feel that if they had to struggle with something, it's only fair that future generations have the same problems and the same struggles. I don't really understand it. Like, the same applies to student loan forgiveness, right? Like, student loans, obviously, if forgiven, would create a weird divide, sort of mentally. It's not a physical divide, but this mental divide between people that did pay those loans back, whether it was 10 grand or 100 grand or 200 grand, they actually worked to pay off that debt. And then you'd have a huge cohort of people that got that education and didn't pay off their 200 grand. It just got forgiven. And so the people that paid the 200 might at first be like, well, it's not fair. I had that struggle, so you should too. Like, why should you have an easier life than me? It's a mindset that I personally can't subscribe to, because an easier life for other people is not inherently a bad thing. Like, just because someone else has an easier track than you do doesn't mean that life therefore should hold them down so that they have to struggle more. Like, if a new way is found that's better, surely it's in the best interest of society to lean into that. And surely as a person, let's say I paid my 200 and then everyone else's loans got forgiven, surely there would be recognition within that just because they benefited from that one specific bit of progress and I didn't in terms of my physical wallet, doesn't mean that I won't benefit from it elsewhere. Like, maybe that means that societally a lot more progress is made because people aren't tied down with a ball and chain with this debt around their ankle their entire lives, right? Like, maybe that actually means that there are medical breakthroughs that wouldn't have otherwise happened because these people are more free to actually seek these creative solutions to things that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to sort of entertain. Maybe art is better because, again, people aren't confined exclusively by money in the art that they're able to put out, and instead they've got a little bit more breathing room to try and create more experimental things, to take more risk in their art too. Like, there are indirect benefits to us all for the progress of society and to to hold it back just because you had a point in time in society and people are coming afterwards and you want to desperately force them and confine them to the life you lived seems backwards to me. But the responses to that TikTok are very, very much in that direction. There's so many people that are just keyboard warrioring like crazy and being so horrible about it and so condescending. All of the people being like, oh, princess, oh, like little girlie is so sad. It's like, oh my God, this is a human being expressing something where she's acknowledged the fact that like some other people have it harder. Okay, great. Like, this is not a contest. She's not saying this to try and score points. She's just venting about something she's finding difficult. That's healthy. I would encourage anyone to do that, right? Why is the ground here continuously farting? Why? Oh, wait. What the hell? My crosshair was red. I'm so confused. I hate the narrative around what that girl said. I think that it's just mean. It's just plain mean. And I mean, I see this in other communities too. It's not just about this, obviously. I mean, the internet's a pretty vile place, I think, at the best of times. But people are just are so quick to be like, well, I know better, and so I'm going to like flex and tear this person down. I mean, transparently, like, I'm sure I've done this in my life as well, and it's not something I'm proud of. I can't think of an instance right now to sort of cop to and be like, yeah, I guess I did it in this case, but I'm sure I've done that plenty of times over the years, right? It's to some extent human nature. You want to feel better about yourself, and sometimes punching down feels like a way to do that. But in my more sort of clear-minded moments, I look at that sort of behavior and I'm like, damn, that's certainly not the type of person that I want to be. But I mean, even just within the zombies community, I'll see people that say like, oh yeah, I really love a certain game, right? I really love Black Ops 4. And then there'll be other people that are like, you literal idiot. Like, you like this? That is disgusting. Like, get away from me. It's like, oh my God, we're humans here, guys. Like, holy guacamole. What is the solution to this, right? Like, how do we progress as a society when it seems like everyone's favorite pastime is ripping each other to shreds? And I think there's a few. Oh, that's a grenade. I don't want a grenade. How do I get a monkey bomb? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. None of those keys. Q, E, E. Okay, let's throw a monkey. How do we figure this out, right? Well, in terms of the world of work, I think that there are a couple of different options, actually. I think that one of the things that's been experimented with a little bit in the last couple of years and continues to, I think, be interesting is the idea of a 4-day work week, right? The idea that maybe people should just have 3-day weekends. And I'm not like 100% married to that being like the solution. I don't know if there is a the solution. I think probably the most all-encompassing solution would be also the most varied and the least easy to pin down, which sounds like a cop-out answer, but I think the solution really is room for flexibility and recognition that, for example, some people just operate much better later in the day. Other people operate much better earlier in the day. Some people have a commute. Other people don't have a commute. And some people, for whatever reason, can't commute. Giving options for that to be possible, not to be looked down on, and still to be valued in the workplace is like, that's obviously kind of the goal, right? I think that we can probably all agree on that. I'm in a position where like I am an entrepreneur, I'm self-employed, I have my own company, and I've completely come from no like nepotism or anything in doing so. Like, the success that I've had on my YouTube channel is not in any part down to my parents or anything like that. So I get the desire for people to be like, oh, well, like, if you're like a self-made person, you should just do it all yourself or what have you and like follow the convention. But I recognize that I've only really got where I am by not following that convention. Like, if I was trying to work the 9 to 5, I would be so miserable, and I know that. So I've really worked hard to carve out a type of life for myself that is not married to that. But it also means that like when hiring people, and that's something that I do for my business, I have the one sort of voice in my head saying, well, it's the 9 to 5 and you need them to like be present the entire time in those hours. And like you want to make sure that that sort of office environment, even if it's remote work, is like maintained and you've got their full attention the whole time. And then another part of me is like, wait a sec, am I just asking them to work for the sake of working now? And like, am I putting in place here a structure which doesn't actually benefit my company? I'm just doing it because that's how other people do it. And I haven't really considered, like, do I need people to be constantly like physically present while I'm making YouTube videos for a living? Like, is that something that is a real dependency of my business? And oftentimes I find that no, it's not. There might be certain times of the day where I'm like, it's important to be around at this given time because there might be news at that time and I need edit support or a thumbnail or what have you. But like, a lot of the time I'm like, actually, a lot of these norms are useless. Like, they don't serve me at all. But that's just the nature of the world. And I think that there's a lot of room for companies in all areas to be like, you know what? Maybe we can find some kind of structure here. Maybe it's just leaning more into remote work and flexible hours or what have you. Like, I don't know. But I think that world surely exists. And it's surely something that societally we should seek out and try our best to tend towards over the next decade or couple of decades or whatever it might be. Because we've had this transformation in the Industrial Revolution, moving from an agricultural society to one really focused on industry and the needs of industry. And I don't see why similar changes and affordances can't be sought to be made now that we're all like this much older and wiser and we're 100 years later and the world of work is so very different. I'm sure some of you probably agree with this, where you feel like you are working really hard at your job, but your job doesn't really fulfill you necessarily, and you feel like that, like, there has to be a better way. And that's what I wanted to really talk about today and focus on, is the exploration of, like, well, if there is a better way, first of all, what is it? And second of all, like, how do we actually get there? I think the capitalism is something that I have benefited from, in the sense that, like, I've been able to build myself a business, and I've been able to, like, have ownership of assets that I previously didn't have ownership. Don't be banging on the door like that. Don't be Easter egging at me. Don't be doing it. I've been able to, like, earn more money in building my business than I would otherwise have been able to make in a non-capitalist society. Like, I recognize that, and I recognize that, like, the benefit that I've had and what my hard work in that regard has achieved. But I also increasingly I'm feeling like, I mean, even within the flexibility of my job and the ability to set my own hours and the freedom that I've crafted for myself, I still find myself tied down to this pursuit of more that I don't believe is a healthy thing to be fixated on in the way that I am. And I don't think it's a fixation that is outsized relative to other people. I'm not saying that, like, I personally have a problem. I think that it's a societal thing, but I look at my output with regards to, for example, like, making my YouTube videos, and I'm very much someone that has to chase views. Like, I have to chase things that I know are going to perform, right? I have to chase things that I know are going to pay my bills. And as an artist and a creative person, I would love to be in a world where I didn't have to bow to the actual analytics and the viewership and the money coming in. I would love to be in a position where I could make whatever the hell I wanted, and I could be comfortable with it getting less views and just go on living my life, right? Like, there's video essays that I've wanted to make for, like, 3-4 years now, and I've not made those video essays, those creative works that I want to sink months and months of my life into, because I can't afford to dedicate months of my life to something that's just going to get, like, what, 50k views and then it's going to stop. Or even if it got like 1 million views, that's still less than I could get from focusing on much less creatively inspired projects that I know are just gonna do well for the business, right? So, like, I'm sort of losing out here just as everyone else is, and I'm someone that I think is doing pretty well for myself. And so, like, if I'm losing out on my sort of creative potential and the things I'd like to do creatively, and I'm sort of still successful within the system, then it's hopefully a clear representation that for all the folks that aren't having the same success in the system, they're suffering even more so from these exact same things. They have no room in their life, just like this girl, for creative projects. They have no room in their life for dating or for even just having friendships and going to the gym and working out. Like, those are sacrifices that she's having to make to survive. And she can't find a job in the city and reduce her commute time and have complete agency over it because she can't afford to be there. She can't afford her own home. And with the home prices obviously historically just absolutely skyrocketing, it's no wonder that she's having to make decisions like getting this job that's far away from her just so that she can earn better money because it's a city job, but also save money because she's freaking far away, and therefore her life as a human suffers, and her life becomes much more anchored around just being a cog in a wider machine, and that may well not be satisfying for many people, and sounds like she's one of those folks, right? There are some folks that absolutely, like I said, like, they're happy to just be a cog in that machine and to just go about things in that way. But I don't think that it makes sense for us as a society, in response to those people, to look at what this girl has said and go, well, princess, you need to suck it up. I think some more compassion in that regard would serve us very well. And I also think that surely everyone watching this video probably agrees that progress and improvement in that world of work, even if it doesn't directly benefit you, it only benefits your children or your children's children, is a net positive for us all. And yet this girl's comment on this and her struggle to live with the reality of the situation currently instead of that greater future possible in some number of years' time, that is met with derision and ridicule. And I hate that for us. So if you've enjoyed this video, drop me a subscribe or a like or like a comment, or honestly, just like watch another video of mine. I got other stuff out there that's not as long as this and not as kind of in the weeds as this. So maybe you'll enjoy a little bit of a respite from it all in another video. I want to experiment with some more content styles this year, and this is one of them. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Salute to the TikTok girl.